Hey, Newbie Dan here. A few weeks ago, I covered using 2x4s to make fences for crosscut sleds. Now I'd like to cover making fences out of plywood. I know this is a trivial task for many of you, but I have a couple of tips that might be helpful. Also, I'm sure there are some people who don't consider this a trivial task. My channel is called the Newbie Woodworker after all, so stick around and we'll jump right in. The front fence of a crosscut sled actually is trivial because it doesn't need to be perfectly straight. So a single piece of 3/4 inch plywood like this should do the trick. The rear fence, on the other hand, needs to be as straight as possible. If it isn't, you'll probably have trouble aligning the fence, and you'll probably get inconsistent cuts. Trust me on this, I know from personal experience. So I like to make the rear fence out of 2 pieces of 3/4 inch plywood, not just one. When 2 pieces are glued together, that helps get the fence straight and also helps to keep it that way. So the first thing I do is check the stock I'm going to use to see if it's straight. This piece is bowed a little, but since I'm going to cut both pieces of the fence from this one piece of wood, I should be able to glue them together with the bowed sides facing each other, so they'll kind of cancel each other out. If your stock is long enough, you should cut your fence pieces about 1.5 inches longer than you want your fence. You can use the extra amount for the blade guard. The stock I'm using is only long enough for my fence at about 16 inches, so I have to cut the pieces for the blade guard separately. Also, I forgot about the blade guard, so I had to go back and shoot it afterwards. I've decided I want my fence to be about 3 inches tall, give or take, and this board is about 6.25 inches wide. So I'm setting my rip fence to 3 inches, which means one of my boards will be a little wider than the other. I'll explain why in a little bit. Now I'm ready to glue. I make sure I've got the board set up so the 2 bowed sides face each other. I need a straight edge to clamp them to help them dry straight. As I've mentioned in another video, I like to use 2 pieces of angle iron as my clamping surface. I put a spacer between them and put clamps on both ends so they stand up on their own. I'm using Titebond 2 for the glue, and I got carried away with it, so don't use me as a gluing role model. I place the 2 pieces against each other, set them on the angle iron, and start adding clamps. I'm trying to keep these 2 edges of the boards aligned as much as possible. That leaves the extra 1/4 inch or so sticking out on this side. I used to add a set of clamps at each end and then add them in the middle, but one of my subscribers, Alapasha Sadri, and I hope I got that name right, suggested not doing it that way. I won't go into the details because honestly, I can't explain it very well, but long story short, it seems to work better if I start at one end and work towards the other. And thanks, Alapasha. Leave a comment and let me know how badly I butchered your name. I take extra care not to get glue squeeze out on the edge of the board that sticks out on this side. After I get the clamps on, I clean up the mess as much as possible, then let the glue dry for a couple of hours. I also glued the pieces of the blade guard together and set them aside to dry. It's time to take the clamps off, then trim the fence down to size on the table saw. This side is pretty even, but the boards aren't perfectly aligned, and there's also some glue squeeze out in spots. But this lip here, it doesn't have any squeeze out on it, and it's nice and straight the entire way. That makes it the perfect edge to place against my rip fence to do the first trim. I'm pretty much guaranteed to get a straight cut all the way on this edge, and that's why I cut one of the pieces a little wider than the other. Then I flip the fence over and trim the other edge, and I've got 2 nice straight parallel edges. If you were able to cut your fences longer for the blade guard, then cut off about 1.5 inches for the blade guard now. Since I glued my blade guard separately, I just need to remove the clamps. Once you've got your fences cut, glued, and trimmed, you can stop right there. They'll work just fine as they are. But I'm going to do some sanding and rounding just for the heck of it. I'm using my belt and disc sander to even the 2 ends. You could sand them by hand, or cut them, or just leave them uneven. It's up to you. I'm also using my sander to round over 2 corners. To me, this is a lot easier than using, say, a bandsaw. For the blade guard, I even out the edges, and then I round 1 corner. While I'm here, I'll also finish up the front fence. Finally, I do some sanding to soften up the edges. I could also use a round-over bit on my router, but this works too. But I leave the bottom edges of the fences nice and sharp. Eventually, I'll cut a chamfer in one of the bottom edges of the rear fence, but not yet, because it interferes with aligning the fence. I clean up the blade guard also. I leave 2 sides with sharp edges because these go against the fence and the base. In an upcoming video, which will be the next video unless something else comes up, I'll show you how to use these fences and also the 2x4 fences to make a crosscut sled. This video is part of an ongoing series about table saw sleds, which includes crosscut sleds, box joint sleds, runners, fences, or whatever else I can think of or you can suggest. So make sure you keep an eye open for other videos in this series. I hope you enjoyed this video and learned something from it. If so, please give it a thumbs up and consider leaving a comment. Thanks! Check out the description for links to products seen in this video. Just scroll down, click Show More, and scroll down until you see the links. And if you like what I do here, click that subscribe button, and don't forget to ring that bell to get notified about new videos. Thanks!